Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, there is a wonderful documentary which has just gone up online, which I really recommend you to see. It's called Guardians of Israel. It's been made by my guest this week, Michael Murphy, who is a freelance journalist and writes for the Telegraph, as well as many other publications. And your second documentary, isn't it, actually? Yeah. Which the first one was about Ireland, wasn't it, Michael? Yeah. Before we talk about the documentary, I think we should take a look. I think this is the trailer we're seeing here. So let's take a look.
When I hear alarm everywhere, that's my job, to make sure that the first response team know what he's doing, to update my mayor, to see if any casualties. And think about if I have one casualty here, now I have to find the family and let the family know. I didn't sleep much the last couple of months, 8-9 months.
What gives you hope?
First of all, that I have 35,000 civilians that I'm in charge on. Secondly, that I love the country. And I know that we're right, and that's our home.
Is Israel a fortress?
Yes. Basically, yes. But every fortress can be break in, people can get in.
But if they were to break through, how long would it take them to
10 minutes.
10
With
minutes?
the motorbike, 10 minutes. With the car, 10 minutes.
And so what do your days look like now? I presume that this gun is always pretty close by.
Yes.
Do you sleep with it?
Yeah.
Does your wife mind?
No.
No?
All my family, my son have one, he's in the army, my daughter is in the army, she have one. We live with guns. I don't think anyone wants war, okay? Even the very right wings here, they have also sons in the army and daughter in the army. We want result, and the result is that the Hezbollah going to be 10, 15 kilometers from the border without capability to go close, to send, as I say, rocket, drones, and aiming to penetrate the border. We go, let's drive.
Michael, I've watched the whole thing. And I mean, I thought it was a remarkable piece of work. Why did you do it?
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you for having me. For two reasons, primarily. Throughout the war, there was around 70,000 people internally displaced in Israel from the north. At the start of the war, that figure was up into the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that nobody was talking about that. It was a very under-remarked upon aspect of the war and Israel's motivations for pressing on with it, especially in the north. And as the conflict in Gaza seemed to come to a denouement, and there was this major conflagration being teed up in the north with Hezbollah, we thought that was a story that should be told of, what's it like to live internally displaced in your own country in a state of perpetual alertness. For British viewers, it's almost as if East Anglia had been rendered uninhabitable because the French were firing rockets constantly at it. Would we tolerate that for a year or 2 years? Would we let that become a sort of reality on the ground? I don't think so. So we wanted to expose those stories and those people whose lives have been affected by it. And I suppose the other thing was a lot of the Israel bashing that you see in marches in Western cities is for a lot of these people, it seems to me that Israel is a sort of abstraction. It's a boogeyman without they don't think about it in terms of the flesh and blood people who live in the country, individuals with a face and a name and hopes and dreams. And so we wanted to sort of humanize the country a bit for a Western audience and show the war from Israel's perspective as well.
Well, actually, that's a good point, because it does make you realize, how little one actually sees from that point of view in this country. I mean, what has your view been, as a journalist, what has your view been of the coverage generally here? I think it's been pretty bad.
I think that, you'd have to take it case by case. There are some really appalling moments, like the Al-Shifa hospital, which certain BBC pundits and others were very quick to say that it was an Israeli rocket that caused that attack, when we now know it was a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket. I think, certain other parts of the coverage, especially at, say, the Telegraph, where I've reported on it, has been fairly balanced. And I think that, certain aspects of the war, like the war that we're now seeing in southern Lebanon, that we were primarily interested in, there was a lot of almost fantasy projection from certain pundits who were saying, Israel is up against a formidable foe, unlike that it's seen before, and that buildings in central Tel Aviv could be toppled by Hezbollah's arsenal of 100,000 rockets, and none of this has come to pass. In fact, the exact opposite happened. The Hezbollah leadership were decapitated in a feat of espionage and operations that I don't, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. And so the pundits got it wrong on that front. And so I do question what was the motivation behind some of the reporting to the contrary that we saw.
Yes. In fact, you have an interview. There's one guy who takes you around his neighborhood in northern Israel, just below, and it's quite remarkable. I mean, whole empty neighborhoods where people have actually just left because, obviously he's been having rockets fired on them all the time. And he shows us actually, doesn't he, or showed you a rocket, basically shrapnel from a rocket and the damage it can do and everything in the film. I thought all of that will come as new to many people, I think, watching.
Yes, I mean, me included. I don't think I had you hear about rockets, and you know that it doesn't sound pleasant. But when you actually pick up just a part of this rocket, which is weighs about 10 kilos, you realize the damage that these things can do. Just small bits of intensely hot shrapnel that can slice through you like butter. Is how Ishai, the man who took us around his kibbutz, described it. And so I suppose that part of the film was to make the threats that Israelis face on a daily basis, especially in that constellation of kibbutzes along the Lebanese border, slightly more tangible.
Yes, exactly. You go down into a bunker, don't you?
Yes.
And then under the house, but then also in the kind of bunker there is a safe room, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, this is permanent. This is how they live. This is what they're having to actually survive in that area.
Yeah, I think, and some of the research for the documentary showed that this really has been baked into Israeli society since its foundation. The people who founded the state, like Ben Gurion and Moshe Dayan, were under no illusions that there would ever be peace.
Yeah.
They said very explicitly that our survival will depend on our ability to underwrite it.
Yeah.
We don't have in other words, we don't have a right to exist. We only have the will to fight for our existence and the means through force of arms to underwrite that existence.
Yes. One thing that struck me as well, you do show a demonstration. It seemed to be quite a small one of people who are anti the war in Israel, but basically there seemed to be the population seemed pretty united. I mean, or am I sort of like projecting on that, or would you say that's true?
I'd say that north of 90% of the population are united on two things. One is the need to expunge Hamas and to completely remove its ability to operate as a cohesive terrorist entity, and the other was to bring the people back to the north who are evacuated. One other thing as well, given what the news that we've seen with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Oh yes, but this is today. This is actually we're filming this on Thursday, 21st, and he's just had a warrant, hasn't he, from for his arrest from the International Criminal Court, which is, again, not exactly covering itself in glory, one can say.
Yes. So, I mean, there's almost complete unanimity in Israel, even among the peaceniks, even among Benjamin Netanyahu's many critics, and he's not a popular man in the country, that is a kind of defamation on Israel itself, that is a a threat to its ability to defend itself.
You say he's not a popular man, but interestingly, the international, at least the international picture of him, sort of did suddenly change. Recently, it was just, people are talking about him being like Bismarck. That this is extraordinary character. What's your view?
Well, I heard recently that the difference between a genius and a madman is success.
Yeah.
And so, maybe some of this is retrospective glow that he's got after that string of marvelous successes that he had with the pager attacks against Hezbollah. He's making good inroads in southern Lebanon now, and Hamas has all but been wiped out. So I think there's some of that post success sheen maybe on Mr. Netanyahu, but I think there's been a dynamic where there's no one almost more critical of the Israeli government than the Israelis themselves and their press, and so he's very unpopular, but for slightly different reasons than he would be in the international press. The international press, he's this warmonger or genocide heir, as they describe him. And within Israel, it's more the idea that he's corrupt and self-serving in some way. And
no, it's. Had you been to Israel before, by the way?
Yes, I was actually out there the month before we started filming, and that was where I got a sort of the idea to make the film.
Yeah, in it as well. There's something that really struck me is that there is one of your interviewees. You have to remind me which one talks about the Western response. The European, the American response to it, to one. I think you were asking him about who it is that he sees as being the allies of Israel. And essentially it is, if you like, the more populist movements in Europe.
Yes, so that was the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, a guy called Amichai Shikli, who's, as you will have seen, is quite outspoken, shoots from the hip.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised to learn that he viewed figures like Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, given Miss Le Pen's father's history of anti-Semitism, as allies of Israel. Yeah. And I thought that this was quite remarkable in the sense that, traditionally Israel, the sort of international liberal democratic order and institutions like the United Nations and et cetera were really forged in the aftermath of World War II and the atrocities that happened to particularly the Jews. I think it speaks to this disillusionment that you're seeing in Israel and elsewhere with that order, that now it's almost been turned against Israel, the community that it was designed to, or that it was conceived to defend. So I view this very much in sort of like the broader political realignment that we're seeing in the Western world with Donald Trump and the emergent populist movements in Europe, and the Israeli government are clearly rooting for those developments.
Yeah, the one exception in his analysis was this country, wasn't it, England? Mm-hmm. And he talks about the sort of red-green alliance, which is one that's been sort of there in the background the past 20, 25 years now, actually, but it's growing. The sort of sense of the kind of left and the Islamic alliance. And so he sort of seemed to suggest we were in trouble, didn't he?
He did. It sort of reminded me of J.D. Vance's remarks earlier this year when he was asked, which Islamist country do you think will be the first to get a nuclear weapon? Yeah. And he said the UK. So it's very interesting to see how we're being perceived around the world, because I'd say those remarks would seem a bit on the nose to a lot of people living inside Britain. To a certain degree, he's got a point.
But what was your impression of what they thought of, for example, in Israel, of these massive demonstrations that, for example, they've been in London? I mean, they've been all over Europe and in America too, but we've had, these big weekly things in London. When they look at that, I mean, I wonder what do they think, the Israelis?
Well, when they hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free,
Yeah.
that means one thing to them, and that's annihilation.
Yeah.
That's the destruction and the dismantling of their state and all of the dangers that come with that. So I think to them, it looks like hordes of people, shrieking, ululating for their destruction.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you look into the whites of the eyes of the people who live in between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Sometimes they live quite close to that sea or that river, and there is a look of incomprehension that they don't really understand why people in Ottawa or Paris have such animus against them.
This also seems to have revealed, doesn't it, certain problems in this country, like these demonstrations have shown two-tier policing and, the sort of obvious difference in the way that certain protesters are treated. So it's been, revealing for us in that kind of way. Will you return to Israel? Will you do a follow-up film?
I'll almost certainly be back in Israel. If for nothing else, I love the country. I think it's a great place to spend time. A follow-up film that could very well be on the cards.
Because as we were saying before we came on air, the whole situation moves very, very fast. I mean, you did this. You were filming in the summer, then presumably.
Yes.
So things have sort of changed even since then.
If we could be embedded with the IDF and go into southern Lebanon and see some of their activities there, then I think there'd definitely be a case for a second film.
Yes, you did. First of all, do you prefer documentary making to writing?
No, I think the two go hand in hand in a way. I think it'd be very hard to do a documentary if you didn't write.
Right.
Because it helps you to get your thoughts down and think in a systematic way. And then documentary filmmaking is just a lot of fun, and it can reach an audience. It's scalable in a way that writing perhaps isn't. My Ireland documentary got over 3 million views.
I was going to ask you about that because the thing is that these sort of programs, the two programs that we're talking about, Israel and indeed Ireland, you wouldn't see them on the BBC, would you? I mean, this is where the internet and YouTube and what have you comes into its own, isn't it?
No, I think that especially in recent decades, the sort of terrestrial channels have left a massive open goal for people who want to do, cover controversial subjects in a sort of without fear or favor and without some sort of varnish of political correctness put over it. And I think that's very much the niche that me and some of my colleagues want to focus on.
The Ireland film, which was basically about people's response to this extraordinary influx of migrants into Ireland, wasn't it? You said 3 million views. That was done for the Telegraph, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. That's extraordinary. I mean, you must be very pleased with that.
Yes, we were chuffed.
Yes, exactly. But I know you've written about this too. I was looking at some of the things you'd written. And there is something almost surreal, is there not? It's about you're an Irishman, aren't you? I mean, there's something almost surreal about what the Irish have been facing over the past, would you say, 10 years?
Yeah, I'd say it's
The speed of it.
Yes, I think that it's Ireland has had several changes running in tandem at breakneck speed, unlike anywhere else in the world. It's gone from being a fairly conservative Catholic society to a sort of woke technocracy practically overnight in a period of 20 years. It's very unlike almost anywhere else, and the same has happened with immigration. In the 1990s, Ireland was as homogenous society as you could get. It's mostly just white Irish or British. And, today it's I think something like 72% white Irish. And that has happened in a matter of decades. You almost feel a sense of cultural whiplash when you're in the country.
Yeah. It's also the population has increased. Irish population is now what? It's around
It's around sort of 75%.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like the overall population of Ireland,
Sorry, it's just over 5 million people.
and it's gone up by about 3.5.
Last year, it went up by, one estimate was 3.5%, which is not only broke a record in the European Union, but it's a record within the European Union from pretty much since they started recording population changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the equivalent, or rather, to put it in context, in Britain, it's gone up by about 1%. I mean, that's with the huge amount of migration we've had, but there's been seemingly no real political response to this. It seems that the entire Irish establishment is of one mind, is it not? When it comes to immigration, this is good for you. It's basically what they're saying.
Yes, I think that there's been a slight shift in the way this is pitched to the public, because there's been hundreds of spontaneous protests popping up all around the country, and some of these have been very embarrassing for the government, because there's sort of grannies and mammies coming out, just not the sort of far right boogeymen that they like to go up against really in the media. And so yeah, I think that the Irish government had Ireland had a mass influx of people from the Eastern European bloc when that acceded into the European Union in the early 2000s. And that was a jolt to the country, but these were majority Catholic Poles and Estonians and people like that. And so they'll often say, well, we've done it before, we can do it again. Problem is, this time round, the cohorts coming in are from places like India, Somalia, Pakistan, Nigeria, far further afield, less cultural proximity, less socioeconomic compatibility. The skills are not necessarily what Ireland needs. And they're often now coming in not as economic migrants, but as refugees. And so, we know from our own country and elsewhere in Europe that the loopholes around asylum have become a much more lucrative way to enter a country than just applying to become an economic migrant. And so these people are going to be a very different cohort to what Ireland has experienced last time. But this sort of liberal ethos that you'll see in Ireland, like in Britain, is that people are essentially infinitely fungible. You can take a man from Pakistan and drop him into Tipperary, and he'll become an Irishman in no time. If he keeps his culture, then that's great, because it will just enrich our society. And the more people you have, the more culturally enriched your society gets. And I feel like that bubble has started to burst in Britain. We've started to wake up to the downsides of mass migration, but it's a bit slower in Ireland.
Do you think in Ireland there is this disdain amongst the elites, for want of a better expression, the establishment, for the ordinary Irish people? Do you think that there is a kind of contempt, disdain, lack of interest in their own heritage?
Yes, certainly. I think, there was a textbook published recently, you may have seen it, with a sort of quintessential Irish family.
Oh, yes.
Ginger, wearing, woolly knitted jumpers. And the description underneath went something like, we don't like outsiders. We just listen to Gaelic traditional music. We don't really travel to other countries or enjoy other food. We just like our cabbage stew. And then next to it had this sort of funky, multiracial, multicultural family who were just pitched as the bee's knees. And so there is this. That
was a kid's book, was it? A kind of kid's book?
A children's school book, yeah. And so there is this sort of like creeping denigration of the culture, as Roger Scruton would call oikophobia. Which is it doesn't actually play as well in Ireland as it does in England, because this is very redolent of some of the propaganda about the Irish that maybe the British would have deployed in the 19th century under Trevelyan. People are backwards bumpkins.
Yes.
And so they,
Trotters, wasn't it?
yeah, exactly. And so it's actually, there's a sort of, you see this sort of liberal elite in Ireland start glitching because they don't buy into that, but then they have to kind of endorse this. And so it's more difficult for them to steam ahead with that kind of thing.
Yes. Interestingly, one thing that, people say here about immigration is, this was planned, etc. But actually, in the case of Ireland, there really was a plan, wasn't there? It was I think it's called Ireland to 2040, is it not?
Yes.
And this was a published plan, published 2018?
Roundabout then.
What was the gist of that? It was presumably Ireland's got to change or what?
So the government basically said that they wanted to double the population of 5 Irish cities, Dublin and Cork and Galway, I think it was, and Limerick maybe. And they wanted the population of Ireland to grow by near 2 million people, 1 million of whom would be workers and people who weren't permanent residents, and another million who would be permanent residents. Now, you just have to do a back of the envelope calculation of Ireland's fertility rate, which is below replacement level, to realize that all of this is coming from immigration. Now, it was smuggled into a very boring, long-winded document, and so it's almost designed to be unreadable. So this is very unknown in Ireland. There is nobody. If you Ireland 20 what, nobody knows about this. But I'd imagine if you'd ask the Irish public, do you want to increase your population by nearly 50% over the next few decades, and had told them where these people will be coming from and what this will mean for their goods, their services, and the social fabric of their communities. I think they would have had some issues with this. It's almost like a sort of Maoist 5-year plan.
Yes, exactly. I think. But what strikes me about when you see coverage of, when you've had migrants going into often really quite small villages, and pretty traditional communities, is just the defiance of people, ordinary people. It's been commented on so many times. Why don't we have that here in England? There's this sense of, defiance, of protest, as you said, across, all generations, really. And why can't we have that in England? But it's very, very clear, that there is this visceral resistance to it, which I feel is good to see. As indeed you do too.
Sure. Yeah. I think in part it's because we were kind of running an experiment after the war. Nobody had an influx of foreigners into developed societies, from less developed societies into developed societies on the scale and at the pace at which Europe did after the war. And so, we were essentially, the doubters or the skeptics could just be called doomsayers because the data wasn't in. But now we know exactly what the results of this are. You only have to look at Malmo or the banlieues in Paris or parts of Holland, which are now pockets of lawlessness. And the Irish have seen that, and they'll often say, we don't want to go the same way as England. And so in a way, they have, they have a perfect idea of where this is all headed. And I also think that they have a history of, plantation and settlement in Ireland that has really become their founding story. And not a good one in the eyes of most Irish people. And so I think that's really at the forefront of their minds as well when they're seeing what's happening today.
I think Leo Varadkar recently said, people are quite right to be angry about the numbers, having been in office and all the rest. But it sort of seems to me that they sort of often say that people, politicians, establishment politicians, when it's done and over with. You know, they can sort of suddenly decide to be a little bit magnanimous, you know, because there hasn't been still a real political response to this. There are no parties as such, are there, even really talking about migration, which is extraordinary when you consider the sort of nationalistic character of, of the politics.
Well, I think it's about time that Sinn Féin changed its name, because from ourselves alone to ourselves and everyone else, it seems like their nationalism only really comes out when it involves Britain.
Yes,
and so I think you know, Sinn Féin for a while had dropped the had dropped the nationalist aspect of their platform and just kept the socialism. And I think a lot of Irish liberals and Féinians thought that this would be a good pressure valve for Irish nationalism, right? You could just funnel it through this socialist organization that still has the nationalist plaudits.
Yes.
And now everybody can see that the emperor has no clothes, because the supposedly nationalist, even nativist party in Ireland has been completely silent on immigration and has given the government a free run.
Did you grow up in Ireland, or did you grow up in England? Or?
I grew up in England.
In England, right. So, you see, I mean, it's possibly another interview, you know, but I'm fascinated by the speed of the collapse of the Catholic Church in Ireland. And I wonder what this has also got to do with the current malaise immigration coming in, but at the same time, you've had the collapse, just a transformation of a society in 25 years, would it be? And it must have sort of, you know, in some ways weakened the traditional dynamic of that society and allowed almost this kind of progressivism to come in.
Yes. I mean, there's a great quote by a guy called Donald Kingsbury who said, you know, tradition is a set of solutions for which we have forgotten the problem.
Yeah.
If you remove the solutions, the problem rears its head. Sometimes it has changed form. Often it is just as strong and recognizable as it's ever been.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you remove the Catholic Church off the chessboard, and in many other countries, what's filled that vacuum has been a sort of new religion of wokeness or runaway progressivism, whatever you want to call it. And you can very much see that the new dispensation is flaunting it in your face. You know, you go down a road and you'll see LGBT pride flags. I think in the halls of the Dáil, which is the Irish Parliament, there are LGBT flags in the windows. If you go into the toilet in the Parliament, you'll find tampons.
Really?
And so, you know, they've essentially, I think, over the last 3 decades, exchanged state-run Catholicism for a new moral order of imported racial and sexual dogmas from America.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But it's also that, I mean, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's just the speed with which things can collapse is one generation, basically.
Yes. I think probably the death knell for the Catholic Church in Ireland were the abuse scandals.
Yeah.
And there was a sort of preference cascade where just, you know, the elite turned on the Catholic Church and everybody else just sort of completely toppled. And many people in Ireland you speak to will know somebody or will have themselves been a victim of that abuse. And so it's that's a genie that's not going to go back into the bottle anytime soon, I don't think.
Can people still see your Ireland film?
Yes,
they can. Because I mean,
it's called Ireland is Full on YouTube.
On YouTube,
yes.
Right? To Ireland is Full on YouTube. Now, with your new documentary, right, Guardians of Israel, where can they see that then, Michael?
So that's on a new documentary platform called Outpost.net on Substack.
Outpost.net, right.
And it's essentially we want to make short Vice-style films with, you know, on issues that the mainstream media aren't covering,
right,
without all the sort of political and correctness and the woke woo woo.
All right, I see. And have you got one in? Well, would it be development or pre-production? What are you going to take on next?
We've got a few films that we're considering doing. One is we'd love to go over to El Salvador and have a look at the prison reform that Bukele has done over there. Okay. We'd also like to go to Malmo and Milan and look at the effects of mass immigration on those cities. So we've got a few projects in the works.
Great. Well, this is a wonderful film. Do watch it. Which is, again, Guardians of Israel. And we'll put the links as well under this video. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure. Michael Murphy there. We shall be back next week, of course. In the meantime, have a happy and safe week, won't you? Take care. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.